Hi, I'm Owen Canfield with the Oklahoman. The U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday saved a critical part of Obamacare, ruling that people can get federal tax subsidies to buy health insurance no matter where they live. The case had threatened to take subsidies away from 87,000 Oklahomans and more than 6 million people nationwide. And joining us now via phone from the nation's capital is the Oklahoman's Washington, D.C. reporter Chris Castile to talk about the Affordable Care Act. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to do it, Owen.
Always busy on a day when the court hands down important opinions. We appreciate you taking a minute.
Yeah.
This is the second time, Chris, as you know, that the court has saved a big part of the Affordable Care Act. The last time, the Roberts Court decided that the individual mandate is a tax and therefore should go forward. And today, there was another turn of the crank. What did the court say today?
Well, basically, as you said, Owen, what the court said was it doesn't matter if you're buying your health insurance from a marketplace called an exchange that was set up by your state, or if you're relying on healthcare.gov, which people in 37 states get their healthcare policies from healthcare.gov, which is the federal exchange, the federal marketplace.
Right.
And the challenge before the court today was, just a few words in the 2010 Affordable Care Act, in the law itself, that said subsidies are available for people who purchase their coverage on state exchanges. It didn't say federal exchange, it just said state exchanges.
Right.
What the court had to sort out was, did that mean that they weren't available for federal exchanges? That would have meant, as you said, millions of people losing coverage, because it requires these tax subsidies for most people to be able to afford this coverage on the individual market. And that's who we're talking about here. Just make a quick clarification for people. We're not talking about people who get insurance at their work.
Correct.
We're talking about people who don't get insurance at their work, people who have to go out, find their own insurance for themselves or their family. So what the court really held today was that, look, Congress's intent in passing the Affordable Care Act was to get more people insured. And the way it had to work was, and also to put new requirements on, to do so, they put new requirements on insurance companies. You have to cover people that are already sick, the so-called pre-existing condition.
Right.
You have to take people who are expensive to cover. The only way that insurance companies can do that is if a lot of people buy insurance. If there are a lot of people, to kind of spread the risk among.
Right, sure.
So what Congress did was say, okay, you have to buy it. It doesn't matter if you're young, healthy, 27 years old, don't want it, you still got to buy it.
Right.
But in order for you to buy it, we're going to help you with federal tax subsidies. So all those things had to work together. That's what the court said today. Congress isn't going to set up a system that's going to fail in some states, because those insurance, the requirements on insurance companies, like to cover people who are already really sick, those markets would fail without a lot of people in there.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
If you don't have a lot of people, and insurance companies, nobody'd be able to afford it.
Right.
And the individual markets would just fail. So basically what the court said today was, Congress isn't going to design a system to fail. So what they meant for everybody, no matter where you live, no matter who you bought your insurance from, or no matter what state you bought your insurance in, and whether you bought it on a state exchange or a federal exchange, they meant to give you federal help to buy it.
Well, and that goes to the next question I had, which was the minority or the minority opinion written by Justice Scalia, who was always fairly terse when he's writing. But he basically said, he argued that the words in the law should mean what are in the law. And what he said was, look, it says state. State doesn't mean federal, but now we're saying that it does. Do you think that this now opens up a sort of a can of worms down the road, that any law that's written could sort of mean what an administration or Congress thinks it means, or are those concerns overblown, do you think?
Case by case basis. And that's how the Supreme Court takes on those things.
Sure.
And there is a precedent for this kind of thing. And basically what Congress established many years ago in a case called Chevron is that you always go by the plain meaning of the law. And if you can't figure that out, then you give deference you kind of defer to
right.
a federal agency, you know, to interpret it.
Right.
But they didn't. The court in this, the majority in this, did not do that. They basically said this is not, you know, what's called a Chevron deference case. They basically looked at Congress. You know, let's look at Congress's intent with the entire law.
Right.
So it was kind of a unique rule, and they could do, you know, they can do whatever they want anytime they want. I guess
sure.
basically, I don't think this was a precedent-setting case.
Right.
You know, any more than say the individual mandate case was 3 years ago. But yeah, so Scalia in his dissent, and that was I guess I don't know if we said it was a 6-3.
Right. 6-3
decision,
ruling.
and Scalia was joined by Justice Alito, Samuel Alito, and Clarence Thomas in the dissent. He said, you know, we should just start calling this SCOTUS care. SCOTUS means Supreme Court of the United States.
Right.
That's kind of a shorthand for the Supreme Court here in D.C. is SCOTUS.
Sure.
So let's just start calling it SCOTUS care.
Yeah.
SCOTUS care.
Chris, one last question before we let you go. Republicans, as you know, in Congress are strongly opposed to Obamacare, but can they actually repeal it?
You know, and they're still making noises about doing that, at least repealing parts of it. And of course they can, Owen, but this week, the Congressional, maybe last week, the Congressional Budget Office came out with some new numbers about how much it would, quote, cost to repeal Obamacare. And that means, you know, how much less tax revenue would be coming in, because, you know, Obamacare had new taxes and it had Medicare cuts. You know, all these kind of pieces.
Right.
You know, that we don't talk about a lot in regard to Obamacare. We tend to talk about the individual mandate and everything. But so they would have to, essentially, to bottom line this, Congress would have to come up with, I think, about $350 billion over 10 years in order to repeal Obamacare. That's not easy.
No.
And, you know, they were ready. It sounds like not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but with all the, you know, reductions that they've made in the last few years, it actually is kind of a tall order. Come up with another $350 billion. But also, you know, they had been ready for the Republicans control both houses, you said. They've been ready in case the Supreme Court had gone the other way in this case today. They had been ready to at least extend these subsidies for a little while. They were not relishing the idea.
Right.
Of kicking 6 million people off of their health insurance.
No, they weren't going to pull the plug right away. No.
No, they weren't going to. So I think, you know, in a realistic sense, I would think that they need to probably move away from the let's just repeal this like with a one-sentence bill. Let's just repeal Obamacare. Start moving into, you know, and they'd have to win the White House to do it. But right. I mean, they're just going to have to change it. Right. I mean, it's just too ingrained in a bunch of different ways.
Right.
Now.
Right.
You know, the president said today, Obamacare is here to stay.
Right. Right.
And in some ways, you know, he probably is right. That they're just going to have to find ways to amend it, maybe repeal some of the things like the medical device tax, maybe deal with this, you know, new tax that's coming up on so-called Cadillac healthcare plans.
Right.
But the full repeal seems far-fetched to me.
Well, Chris, again, we thank you for taking some time today from D.C. to talk about the Supreme Court, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Glad to do it, Owen.